Welcome to Adulting Candle Company, where grown-up vibes meet cozy self-care. Whether you're manifesting peace with a crystal-infused candle, rewinding with a nostalgic wax melt, or turning your bathroom into a spa with our signature body products, we've got you. We're not just candles, we're a vibe. All handmade, ethically sourced, and wrapped in love. And sometimes glitter. Craving peppermint wonderland? Obsessed with opulent florals? Need a candle that says, "I survived today"? Yeah, we have all that too. Join the Adulting Candle Company fam and light your life. One intention, one flame, one fabulous scent at a time. Shop now at www.adultingcandleco.com or find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Adulting Candle Co. I'm Henny B, and welcome to the World War I Stories podcast, where history comes alive through the voices of those who lived it. Some scenes in these stories may be too graphic for sensitive listeners, so listener discretion is advised. Hey, real quick, before we start today's episode, I've got some news I'm excited to share. World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, Volume 1, it's now on Kindle. It's a collection of 10 stories that originally aired right here on the podcast, some of our most powerful ones. If you've been following along, or if you're just jumping in, it's a great way to revisit them or read them for the first time. Just search World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches in your Kindle app or even on Amazon. If you happen to be one of those that prefers physical books, don't worry, the paperback is in the works and on the way. So, without further ado, today's episode, The Beast We Built. Hey, watch it! The shout came from the back of the lorry, where half a dozen mud-caked soldiers were bounced nearly off the benches as the wheel slammed into another rut. Ned gritted his teeth and leaned into the wheel, blinking through the thick spray of rain that blurred the world to a smear of brown and grays. "I am watching it," he muttered. Not that any of them could hear. Doesn't help if the damn road disappears. The windscreen was little more than a streaked plane of misery, and the wipers squealed like wounded animals with every pass. The lorry jolted again. Not as bad this time, but groans from behind told him the lads weren't convinced. He couldn't blame them. This road, if it could be called that, had once been a country lane winding through French farmland. Now it was a scar, carved by weeks of troop movement and artillery hauls, soaked through by days of cold rain. The shell holes hadn't been patched, the ditches had overflown, every mile was a gamble. But he drove, because that was his job. Get the lads in, bring the others back. Sometimes bodies, sometimes men too shell-shocked to know which war they were even in. Today's load was still breathing, swearing, and giving him grief, so things could have been worse. He shifted down as they crested a rise. The gears growled in protest, but the engine held. Below, the distant glow of a camp came into view. Rows of tents, canvas-topped lorries, and a smudge of light where someone had coaxed a fire under cover. This would be home for these men in the back, at least for a while, or until they died. One of the two. Ned eased off the clutch and let the lorry roll downhill. His fingers ached from the grip he hadn't realized he'd kept since the last bend. He flexed them, exhaled through his nose, and finally allowed himself a glance at the pocket watch tucked near the dash. Still on time. The lorry hissed as it came to a stop, steam rising from the bonnet in lazy curls. Ned sat for a moment, listening to the men disembark. Boots thudding to mud, gear clattering, voices low and weary. He didn't turn to watch them go. He already knew how they looked. Too young, too thin, too tired. Same as all the others. A shadow broke from the gloom. "Driver," came the voice. A sergeant, square-jawed, eyes set deep with grief or fatigue, maybe both. "You're not done. Ned opened the door and slid down, boots splashing into a shallow puddle. "There's a body. Captain took a shell near Ypres 2 days ago. His lot want him back to HQ before the week's out. You'll drive him." Ned didn't ask questions, just nodded. The return trip was silent. The tarp-covered form in the back shifted only with the road, the occasional groan of the chassis the only sound between towns. The rain didn't let up. By the time he reached his motor pool, the sky was lightening. He parked, killed the engine, and reached for his kit. That's when he saw the officer waiting. "Private Calder?" Ned straightened. "Sir?" "You're being redeployed," the man said. "Mainland, effective immediately." Ned blinked. "Redeployed, sir? To where?" The officer didn't answer, just handed over a folded slip of paper. "You'll report to the Paris-bound train at 0600. Someone will meet you there. That's all I can tell you." And with that, the man turned and walked away. Ned looked down at the paper, then up at the empty yard around him. He had no idea where he was going or why. The train to Paris had been uneventful. The crossing to Dover less so. The channel, churned by spring wind, had tossed the ferry like a tin bucket. By the time he arrived at Victoria Station, London was blanketed in drizzle and grayness that seemed to seep into the bones. A man in a civilian overcoat was waiting on the platform. No introduction, no salute, just a curt nod and a quiet, "Follow me." They didn't speak again until they reached the Ministry building, an unassuming stone structure with narrow windows and brass placard that simply read, "War Office Mechanical Transport Department." Inside, Ned was handed off to a bespectacled clerk who led him down 2 flights of stairs into what looked more like a basement workshop than a military office. The air smelled of oil and metal shavings. 3 men looked up from a massive table cluttered with blueprints and scaled models. One of them, gray beard, sharp eyes, stepped forward. "You must be Calder," he said. "Driver, Western Front? Good. We need your hands and your back." Ned blinked. "Sir?" "You're here to help us build something," the man said. "Something the Germans won't see coming." He gestured towards the drawing table where a rough sketch showed a hunking metal shape crawling on endless threads, a cannon poking from what looked like a turret. "A machine that doesn't care about mud, trenches, or barbed wire, but it still needs a man inside, needs to be drivable, survivable. We've got engineers. What we don't have is someone who knows what it's like to drive across hell." The man smiled faintly. "That's you, son." The older man motioned Ned towards the table, brushing aside a stack of drafted schematics. "Let's make it official. I'm Major Lionel Hart, head of the Mechanical Development Team." He nodded to the man beside him, a thin fellow with ink-stained fingers and perpetually raised eyebrow. "This is Mr. Blakely, Engineering Logistics. He'll try to make sense of the senseless." Blakely offered a half smile, more polite than warm. "And this," Hart turned to the man at the far end of the table who had been watching Ned with unusual attentiveness, "is George Alden, our chief engineer." Alden stepped forward, extending a grease-darkened hand. He was taller than the others, a streak of silver cutting through his beard and temples. His handshake was firm, but his eyes lingered a second longer than expected. "Ned Calder," Ned offered, "driver, formerly of the 3rd Supply Corps." George nodded slowly. "Pleasure." He didn't let go right away. Odd, Ned thought. George dropped his hand and turned back to the drawings on the table. "Let's get to work." Major Hart clapped his hands together. "You'll be assisting with the practicality side of things, Calder. Controls, visibility, vibration, the sort of details our crew overlooks in favor of armor thickness and axle tolerances." Ned looked around the room. Blueprints were splayed across every surface, covered in tight pencil scrawl and red circled revisions. The shape was boxy, strange, sloped like a whale with a spine of rivets. He gestured to one of the sketches. "What am I looking at?" George looked up from a sectional view. "The future," he said, then more plainly, "we're building something that can crawl over trenches, chew through mud, and keep moving when nothing else can. The generals want something unstoppable. Ned studied the diagram again. Looks like a boiler fell over and grew treads. Blakely snorted. George smirked. That's why you're here, Calder. You'll be the first to sit behind the controls. We need to know what works before they start sending these monsters across the channel. Ned nodded. The assignment had just become clear. He wasn't just a driver anymore. He was a test subject. The air inside the tin-roofed shed was thick with oil and sweat. Tools clattered from somewhere near the back as a man cursed the seized bolt. The scent of hot metal clung to everything. Old grease, scorched wool, and the raw tang of machine work. Ned sat inside the iron husk they were calling a land ship. More riveted furnace than vehicle. The armor plates were unfinished and jagged in places, the air trapped and already stifling. He lowered himself onto the driver's seat, a bare steel bracket bolted just inches above the floor. No padding, no backrest. The jolt rattled up his spine like a punishment. Bloody hell, he muttered, shifting. George Alden looked up from a table cluttered with schematics. Problem? This seat, Ned replied. If you plan on sending this thing over shell-split Earth, a man will lose feeling in his arse inside an hour. Need a cushion. Something spring-loaded if weight allows. At the far end of the room, a voice chimed in. More weight, more drag. You want comfort, Calder? Take a bloomin' passenger car. All eyes turned. It was Hargrave. Sharp-jawed, wired-thin, and fresh out of Cambridge. His sleeves were rolled, arms crossed. We're building an armored vehicle, not a parlor on treads. Ned met his stare evenly. You try hauling 8 men through trenches and see if you still feel clever. This isn't about comfort. It's about staying functional after 10 hours in hell. Hargrave scoffed. You think 10 pounds of spring and padding won't matter when the gearbox is already straining to move 5 tons? No, Ned said, standing. I think a driver unable to brace himself properly is more likely to make mistakes, and a crewman who can't reload without bruising his ribs is more likely to die. A pause. The shed seemed to shrink around them. George Alden cleared his throat. He's right, Hargrave. But not entirely, Alden said, tone measured. We'll look at the seat supports and see if a low-tension spring might distribute impact better. Minimal weight, functional gain. Hargrave muttered something under his breath and went back to his drafting board. Alden looked at Ned. We built this thing together, Calder. Theory and practice. Don't hold back. I won't, Ned said, and climbed down from the hall. It was only when his boots hit the floor with a dull scrape that he realized how awkward the descent had been. Getting into the thing had been worse. A scramble up angled plates and stray bolts like a rat climbing a kettle. There should be a ladder or something, he muttered, so the crew doesn't break their necks trying to get in this damn thing. He shoved his hands into his pockets, still muttering about sharp edges and snapped ankles. That's when he felt the slip of paper. A small rectangle tumbled free as he pulled his hand out, landing face up on the concrete floor. Alden bent and picked it up before Ned could react. He didn't say anything at first, just looked. It was an old photograph, slightly curled at the edges. A young woman with soft eyes and thick hair sat in a garden chair. A boy standing beside her with a crooked smile and a newsboy cap too big for his head. Is that your mum? Alden asked. Ned hesitated, then nodded. Yep, and my da. Alden's gaze lingered on the photo. How old did you say you were again? 24. Alden handed the photo back and straightened. Interesting. Very interesting. He turned and walked back towards the drawings. Ned stood there for a moment longer, the photograph now pressed flat against his palm. That had been strange, he thought. Odd tone, odd question, and for just a second he'd almost sworn Alden had murmured something. A name, maybe. Elsie. But no, he must have imagined it. Shaking off the thought, Ned tucked the photo back into his breast pocket and followed Alden back to the table. Let's get back to work, Alden said without looking up. The cottage smelled like coal dust and bread dough, things that hadn't changed since Ned was a boy. He stood in the narrow kitchen doorway, still wearing his uniform, watching his mother knead dough with her forearms dusted in flour. The kettle hissed behind her. She looked up. "You're thinner." He smiled. "You're shorter." She gave him a half-hearted swat with the back of her wrist. "Sit. Tell me everything." He sat. The tea came first, then silence, then words. "We tested it outside Cambrai," he said finally, the landship. Elsie furrowed her brow. "That machine you wrote about?" He nodded. "It works. Mostly. Heavy and awkward still, but it can cross trenches, cut through barbed wire. Gunner said it felt like riding inside an earthquake." She didn't smile. She only listened. "There'll be hundreds of them soon," she added. "Maybe thousands." Elsie looked down into her cup, then back at him. "And you, are you safe now?" Ned paused. "No one's safe, Mum, but I'm not at the front, not for now." They sat in that quiet space for a moment before she asked, "You said in your letter there was a man, an engineer." "Alden," Ned said. "George Alden. Older. Speaks careful. Treats me like glass one day and scrap iron the next." Elsie froze. Ned saw it. The stillness behind her eyes, the way her mouth parted and didn't close. He leaned forward. "Mum?" She blinked. "You said his name was George Alden?" "Yeah." Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the cup. "He went to Oxford. Engineering. His family had money. Real money. They didn't want him with someone like me." Ned's breath caught in his throat. "I met him when I was 16, she continued. "He was 18. Kind. Reckless. We had plans. Foolish ones. But when they found out, they forbade us to see each other. We were both so devastated. He knew his academics depended on his father's contributions." "You're saying that you know George Alden?" She continued almost as if she had not heard him. "We started sneaking off to see each other when we could, but eventually he stopped coming round. I think the pressure got to him. That was 25 years ago. About 10 months before you were born." Ned stared. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Elsie's voice dropped. "John Calder was your father in every way that mattered. He raised you, loved you until the day he died. He gave you his name. But he wasn't my father." "No," she said, and her voice cracked just once. "He wasn't." Ned leaned back in his chair, the words tumbling in his chest. Alden. The way he looked at the photo. The moment his voice had caught Elsie nearly under his breath. It all made sense now. And yet, it didn't change everything. "I still miss him," Ned whispered. "John. Every day." "I know," she said. "So do I." They sat in the hush of the kitchen, two people rearranged by truth, not shattered, not quite, but changed. Something old had been unearthed, something living. The landship idled beneath him, engine rumbling like distant thunder trapped in iron lungs. Ned sat in the driver's seat, gloved hands resting on the levers. Around him, the rest of the crew moved in silence, a nervous kind of reverence. They all knew what was coming. Outside, the world was mist and mud. The field ahead had once been farmland. Now it was a torn canvas of wire, crater, and blood. Dozens of machines just like this were lined up behind tarpaulin screens ready to roll for the first time. He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging in the cold air. They'd trained for weeks, but nothing could prepare a man for the moment the machine actually left cover, for the moment it became real. He hadn't spoken to Alden, not after the leave, not after his mother's quiet confession. Alden still hovered around the test site, still reviewed design notes, still offered the occasional correction like a father tutoring his son. Though now Ned saw every word differently, saw every glance as something heavier. He never asked, never confronted, and George Alden never offered. Maybe some truths weren't meant to be spoken. A whistle cut the air. Ned gripped the controls. "Ready," he called out. "Ready," came the muffled response from the crew. He eased the levers forward. The land ship groaned, then crept ahead, treads churning the mud, rivets rattling in protest. One by one, others followed, a parade of iron monsters moving towards the line. The barrage had already begun, a curtain of fire ahead of them. The ground trembled underfoot, but this time they wouldn't go around the trenches, they'd go through them. Behind them, Alden stood with the other engineers, watching his machine crawl into history. They didn't wave, they didn't speak. The land ship lurched forward like a wounded beast. Gears howled in protest, the engine belching smoke with every jolt. Ned gritted his teeth, gripping the levers with blistered hands. Mud sprayed across the narrow viewport as the tank bucked over another shell crater. "Steady," he barked, but the words were lost in the roar. Bullets pinged off the plating like hail. Somewhere behind, another tank was burning, smoke twisting black against the gray dawn sky. Men were screaming outside. Or maybe that was just the wind, or his own voice. They crested a small ridge of churned-up earth, and then he saw it. The German line. Wire, trenches, guns. Machine gun nests open-fired the moment they cleared the embankment. The armor held, for now. Sparks flew across the riveted hull. Inside, it sounded like someone shaking a can of nails. The gunner called out, "We got sight lines!" "Take 'em," Ned ordered, sweat streaking through soot on his face. The tank's cannon fired with a deafening thud. Then again. A section of trench collapsed in a spray of mud and timber. A figure went flying. Ned didn't have time to watch. They were moving again, crawling forward, a monster of steel and fire. Then came the whistle. High, sharp, rising. Shell incoming. Ned barely had time to brace. The explosion cracked the world open. Fire bloomed on the starboard side. He was thrown backward, slammed into the bulkhead. Heat, smoke, screams. He blinked through the haze. The gunner's post was a blackened ruin. The loader, gone. The floor was thick with blood and oil. He could hear the engine dying, choking on its own breath. Another blast outside. Close. Ned crawled toward the hatch. He could barely move. His left arm hung useless. His legs shook with every breath. But he shoved the hatch open and tumbled into the mud. The moment he hit the ground, he rolled. Instinct, not thought. Bullets zipped past his ears. He pushed up and ran. Not towards the front, not toward glory, toward survival. Every step felt like it might be his last. Behind him, the land ship was still burning, a monument to what they'd built and what it had cost. He reached the edge of the staging trench and collapsed over the side. Hands pulled him down. Voices shouted. Someone shoved a water canteen into his chest. But all he saw was fire. All he heard was the sound of the engine dying. The muster point looked nothing like it had before. Tents leaned with fatigue. The mud had swallowed the roads whole. Engineers and officers stood in clumps, waiting. Ned stumbled into the clearing, his uniform torn, face unrecognizable. A voice called out, "Ned?" It was Alden. Alden took a hesitant step closer, eyes scanning the soot and blood on Ned's uniform. Ned stopped. He didn't salute. He didn't nod. "You're alive," Alden said softly. Then, after a beat, "Well, how did it go?" Ned didn't answer right away. His breath caught as images flashed. The screams, the smoke, the twisted metal, the sound of the engine dying beneath him. He met Alden's eyes. "Well, Father, it's certainly a beast. Vulnerable, but a beast. But let's be honest, this war's in charge, and that beast changes nothing." You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. If this episode stayed with you, if it stirred something quiet or left you in stillness, share it, follow the show, leave a rating, help keep these stories alive. Our first collection now lives on Kindle. Search World War I Stories Tales Beyond the Trenches Volume 1 in your Kindle app and carry these echoes with you. For glimpses behind the curtain and stories between the stories, join me on Instagram at WWIPod_HennyB. And if you'd like to see your name in the credits, become a producer. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/World War I Stories and help power the next tale into existence. Thank you for walking back in time with me.